What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski, great fight, the highest level MMA display that you will see. Bit of a controversial ending, and I think we should debate whether or not Volk was robbed. But before we do that, we got to just talk about what a great night this was.
It was an awesome night, and I really think that they were absolutely spot on with it being pound for pound number one versus pound for pound number two. And I think this was about as high level of MMA as we've ever seen, especially out of Volkanovski. You know, everybody knew that he was the underdog coming in, and Islam seemed like this unstoppable force that was just going to go in there and steamroll the pound for pound number one guy. But Volkanovski was coming in there to fight. He was coming there to win, and he wasn't there to just make it to the end, or he wasn't there to just see how many rounds he could win or see how long he could go without getting taken down. No, he brought the fight to Islam. He made Islam question himself a few times in there, but I certainly had Volkanovski winning that fight at the end of it after watching it.
Yeah, there's definitely an argument, and I don't think it would have been a robbery either way. If they had said Volkanovski won, I would say, okay, I could see a case for that. Islam did win, and I can see a case for that being made. And I think when you look at the fight, it really comes down to a couple of rounds, because I think we can all agree that rounds 1, 4, and 5 are not up for debate. Rounds 1 and 4 were clearly won by Islam. He had the dominant ground position in those rounds. He had the control time, racked up almost 8 minutes of total control. And then round 5 clearly was Volkanovski. I mean, the optics of the end of the fight, the last minute of the fight, Volkanovski on top, Islam shelling up in the guard with Volkanovski raining shots down on him. I mean, there's really something to be said for the way that this fight ended. So I think it really comes down to rounds 2 and 3. Round 2, Volkanovski won, in my opinion. It was very close on the feet, but when you look at who did the more damage, it went to Volk. Also, Volk had a knockdown in that round, and I think that really solidified the round for him. So I gave round 2 to Volkanovski. So going into round 3, I have it 2-2. But in round 3, I did have to give it to Islam, and here's why. It was also very close on the feet. Both guys landed good shots. Both guys landed big shots. But I think Islam landed the better shots in round 3. He also had a handful of takedowns. Now, granted, Volk did get back up immediately, but I think the takedowns still should have scored, and there's something to be said for them.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on a lot of that, but I do see the third round being a little bit different. Now, when you saw there was about 2.5 minutes left on the clock, which is right in the middle of the round, and Volkanovski gets his back taken, you start to worry. You go, okay, Islam Makhachev now has 2.5 minutes to work from the back. This is about as bad as it gets in an MMA contest. But Volkanovski was smiling. He was looking at the camera. He was basically thumbs up in the crowd saying, I'm not in any danger down here, even though we all know that's not the case. But he really did prepare himself perfectly for this fight. And I think that the way he was able to, completely shut down all of Islam's offensive attacks while having his back taken with a body triangle was very impressive. So impressive that he was even looking for shots, found a bunch of shots, a bunch of punches, and everybody thinks that those are just like pointless punches to throw, because if you've got your back taken, you shouldn't be worried about striking, you should be worried about getting up. And I understand that. I totally agree with that. But Volkanovski was making sure his shoulder was on the ground. Of course, Islam's top hand was over the shoulder and the other one was under, so he had like the seatbelt grip. But he knew he wasn't in any serious danger of a choke because he had that arm caught, and you're not going to get rear naked if somebody has their arm under your arm. So he was able to find some wrist control and then start throwing some strikes of his own, and they were very effective. Islam at one point in that portion of the fight started to throw his own strikes because he realized he didn't have a submission attempt really there. He had a good position in the body lock. I'll give him that for sure. But I do think that Volkanovski, even though he had his back taken, was winning that portion of the fight. I understand a back take is a very important thing, but submission attempts are more important to me than just a position. I think we have to look at it this way. Either the rules have a flaw in them and they prioritize position over anything else, or we have to change the rules. Because I see that fight as damage getting done by Volkanovski while Islam Makhachev is just holding on to a position. So for me, I kind of see that third round going towards Volkanovski, even though it was a very close round and even though he did have his back taken. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing the judges look for is damage. And when he's landing 5 and 6 punches to every time Islam lands one, that screams to me that he's winning that round.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, and it really does come down to that third round. But I won't go as far as to say robbery, because robbery is a very clear, the first fight of the night on the card comes to mind. It was just an absolute rob job. You're like, what were the judges thinking? These judges should be fired, et cetera, et cetera. This didn't rise to that level. This was just a great fight that could have gone either way. And I agree with you. Maybe we do need to revise and look at the rules, because is just holding on to a position with a body lock, a body triangle, sufficient enough to win those minutes if the person that's being held is actually doing more damage, because we know above all goes damage. So it's a very fair point that you make there. I'm not going to say that it's going to sway my decision. I still think Islam won that third round, but I certainly can see what you're saying, and I could see how there could be an argument made there.
Yeah, and I really hope they run this back. I think this fight definitely deserves a rematch and maybe even a trilogy if we need it. But one thing about that positional issue that I have with the ruling and the judging, if somebody's holding you against the cage and they aren't doing anything offensively, sometimes they'll break you up. If you're doing something on the ground and you're essentially stalling, they will stand you up and make you reset so you can actually give the fans some sort of an entertaining fight. I believe that if Volkanovski wasn't being so active, Islam would have looked like he was stalling behind him. And I think that would be almost grounds for a stand-up. I know that sounds crazy. You've got a body triangle and you've got a seatbelt grip. That sounds like it's really bad and it should never get stood up. But if you aren't throwing any strikes, if you aren't throwing up submission attempts, and all you're doing is holding on because the rules say that if I have his back, I'm not going to get stood up and I win this round easy and there's no way around it, then people are going to start to look for that as a way to kind of sneak through a loophole and make themselves win rounds. I believe Volkanovski is the reason that position didn't get changed or modified or stood up. He was throwing all of those strikes and he was landing a lot of them, all while defending chokes against one of the most lethal submission and ground artists that we have in the sport today. And I think you also have to look at the demeanor of the fighters. Volkanovski was entertaining the crowd. He was bringing the fight, in my opinion, controlling the octagon. He was pushing forward. He was pressuring a guy who would love for somebody to come pressure on him because he looked for those takedowns. And at the same time, Volkanovski goes in there and he tries to start taking down Islam. He goes out there and he starts looking for trips. And a couple of those reversals where Islam got a good position on him and went for a takedown got reversed perfectly. So what tells me is that Volkanovski prepared himself perfectly for this. I think the people that he got around him for this camp were the exact right people. He gave all the other fighters the blueprint for how to deal with somebody with such overwhelming grappling skills like Islam Makhachev and the rest of the Team Khabib guys. And I think that this camp that Volkanovski just went through made him even more of a dangerous fighter. I think he's still the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world, and every featherweight needs to realize what kind of monster that this fight camp and this fight just created.
No doubt. And we definitely have to give a shout out to Craig Jones and Frank Hickman. Volkanovski came out and said, we didn't do anything in this camp that wasn't related specifically to things that we'll see against Islam. And Craig Jones, for those that don't know, is one of the best submission grapplers in the world, ADCC medalist. He's like a heavyweight. I think he's over 200 pounds. Frank Hickman used to be the wrestling coach at Tiger Muay Thai. I think he kind of splits time between there and some of the other camps now. Great wrestling coach. I mean, he brought in the who's who of the grappling world, and it showed in spades because he had an answer for everything that Islam was throwing at him. I mean, Islam's good with the singles and the doubles. He had an answer for that. Islam's great in the clinch against the cage with the trips. He had reversals. He had answers for that. So I cannot say enough good things about the way Volkanovski's camp was run. And for Hickman and for Jones, those guys did exactly what they were supposed to do. And whatever they got paid, they earned every dollar of it.
Who would have thought Bang Tao Camp out of Thailand, the home of Muay Thai, would be such a good place to find wrestling and a place that you could literally have the pound-for-pound #1 fighter go out there and show the world just how good he is.
Who knew? Thanks for watching this video, guys. We're your hub for all things combat sports. If that's your jam, we appreciate a subscribe and a like on the video, and drop us a comment down below. We'll see you next time.
Peace.